Do you want to do that? And do the clappable?
I always can't do the clappable though. Do you need? Can I? Am I allowed to?
Absolutely. Are we spinning all around? We are spinning all around.
Okay. Do I
You have
just?
to do the whole spiel, mate.
I don't know the
This is
spiel.
SAIS Summit, Brett's interview.
Okay.
3 cameras rolling.
3 cameras rolling.
Sound speeding.
Sound speed, camera, lights, marking, tracking, scene 1, take 1. Brett Thompson with melted cheese. Let's go.
Brett, who are you and what is it that you do?
Brett Thompson, co-founder and CEO of New Form Foods, local, born and bred Cape Townian, but managed to get out. Spent some time away from the mother city, which was great. And for the last 10, 15 years, I've worked in the food industry, but more closely linked to alternative proteins. So that took me on a pretty wild journey from Cape Town via Stellenbosch for a period of time. Talking about alternative proteins, you can imagine, it's quite a challenge. They look at you funny when you're not eating boerewors. And spent a couple of years in Berlin and came across this technology called cultivated meat. And we were the first company in Africa to grow a beef burger. That's the...
I've got goosebumps on this as well. Like I think that's how you were introduced. You should interview Brett. He makes meat.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. How does this even?
Yeah.
How?
So, I mean, I'll just say my team do the hard work. I just do these things.
The pretty
the shiny stuff, you know. So no, I've got a team of 10 people based in Cape Town and actually around South Africa as well. And maybe I'll just talk to the actual core of the technology and then we can go from there. What we do is not, I mean, to clarify, when we talk alternative proteins, we're not plant-based. So we're not taking plant proteins and trying to make it taste like meat. What we're essentially trying to do is to take cells from an animal and then perfectly recreate the conditions of the animal, just outside of the animal, and then grow muscle and fats and all that great stuff that we love to eat, and then form burgers and sausages and meatballs and whatever you want, without the need of ever having to slaughter that animal. So that's at a high level. I can sort of go a little bit into the kind of one or two, there's 3 main stages that we operate in. But essentially what we are doing is a fermentation process with a bit of tissue culture, which most people should be familiar with fermentation because they drink beer all the time, and others would be familiar with tissue culture because that's how we do vaccines, essentially, at a high level.
First of all, well, Christian comes from a farm. I come from a farm, and I used to teach as well, and it's shockingly few children realize where meat comes from. It comes from a package. But when we know that's an animal being reared and raised and then slaughtered for the enjoyment of its flesh, is that the only problem that you're solving? Is that we're looking at this humanitarian perspective, or is there other components but that's the main one?
Yeah. So I think for my journey personally was 15, 16 years ago. I stopped eating meat. I did some ethics, applied ethics at a university course. It hit home, and I thought this is a very good argument for not eating animals. So why do we eat some animals and not others? Why do we eat pigs and not dogs?
Yeah.
And that argument for me was enough to change my dietary habits. I think there's a big difference between, I'm assuming, the farms that you guys grow versus the farms that we see, the sort of industrial sized farms around the world. And I think that's also something that and definitely on the subsistence side. I mean, you've got the West Transkei, we've got these rolling hills and cows running on them. That's not what I'm talking about. I think the way I look at it is that there are probably about 2 or 3 main projects that I think are trying to solve. There's an animal welfare component with when you raise 70 billion animals on land every single year internationally, and trillions in the marine world. So there's an animal welfare component. There is a environmental degradation component. Soya is grown not for people, but it's grown for cows in the Amazon, for example. So we've got that component of the environment, so that's something that we need to address. And I think the final one is on human health. And I think if we are able to make healthier proteins, we should be trying to do that. And what New Form Foods is trying to do is actually try and create a platform that allows companies, the big companies, because the problem isn't that we can't make the choice.
Yeah.
The problem is that these big companies don't really know how to take a step into these new technologies because they're so abstract to them. Yeah. So we're trying to solve that problem. We're trying to solve the problem of the retailer that doesn't understand, they understand that the consumer wants something different in the future, but they don't know how to go about it yet. And I think there's also a lot of misnomers about us saying we're coming to disrupt. I think we're trying to be an iterative process on an existing technology, which is agriculture. It's 10,000 years in the making. Every year it's getting more efficient, and we want to be that next stage, that next iteration.
Absolutely. Let's get into the three components to what it is that you do.
So there's three stages essentially for what we do. They are isolating the cells from an animal, feeding those cells something, and then growing them in something. Okay. So three stages. It's basically, it's farming. It's called cellular agriculture for a reason.
Oh, wow.
It's essentially agriculture at a very molecular level, if I can call it that way. So how we start is we work with a sanctuary actually in Greyton here. We take isolation of cells. It's called a biopsy. It's about the size of a peppercorn. We then bring those cells back to our facility in Woodstock, of all places. A lot of people don't believe me when I say I work out of Woodstock and we grow meat. I mean, both those conversations are just bizarre. But we bring those cells, that isolation to our facility. Our team, which is made up of a dedicated group of chemical engineers, stem cell biologists, media development specialists, etc. They then isolate those cells and then start a process that we call cell line development. And what we're trying to do is make those cells continue to grow just outside of the animal. You can take cells out of your body or my body, they'll die. They need a host. Yeah. So what we're doing is developing a cell line that can continually grow, ultimately meaning that the pig and beef and pork that we have today means we never have to go back to the animal to harvest those cells. So that's the first stage. We've got to start that cell line process, and then those cells need something to eat. And what we've developed is, and similar again in the brewing process, is instead of feeding yeast glucose to make ethanol, we're feeding cells to make more cells. And those cells need a few things: amino acids, glucose, nutrients like vitamins, and a bunch of other stuff, salts, etc. And because we're creating what happens in the animal's body without needing the animal. And that's a crucial part of our process, because that's where the nutrients come, that's where the flavor comes, that's a lot of the area of the expertise that we've developed as a company for saying how do we actually make this scalable at the end of the line. Okay, so anyway, we take cells, we feed cells something, and the third stage, we need to scale it. We're at SA Innovation Summit, everybody here is talking about how do I scale my business. We were at a stage of R&D and development. Just beyond that, we're moving into pilots. That's the next stage for us. And what a pilot facility looks like is essentially a microbrewery, okay? And a microbrewery has got about 10,000 liters of capacity, and in that facility are vats. And those vats produce, if you're thinking about beer, they make beer, but in our case, it makes muscle and fat. And at a facility that we are planning to build over the next few years, that will be able, at a pilot scale, be able to produce around 0.5 ton to a ton of meat per month. Okay. Per month now. So that is very different to 18 months that an animal is requiring to get to a slaughter weight. So that's where we start becoming a bit more efficient. And to talk a little bit about the engineering, the tech around it, you can imagine these vessels, they are creating that environment of animals need, or cells need, mammalian cells need 37 degrees to grow. So you and I, we're keeping ourselves at 37 degrees. You need those oxygen, you need carbon dioxide to be monitored, you need the pH components to be there's lactate that's produced by the cells, you've got to monitor this acidity, etc. So this vessel is just doing all that while agitating the cells in the circular motion and creating movement, because animals move. So all this whole process, that one stage, cells, that stage where we feed the cells, and the stage of how to make the cells feel happy and move, is a recreation of an animal, and we've been able to achieve it at quite a small scale at the moment, and we've done a lot of tastings across the world, including South Africa, and now we're trying to work out how do we do what we've done with this platform at a small stage to get into the hundreds of tons for a company that we work with.
That's one of the first things that I wrote down is efficacy, and then the other one is something different, but we'll get to that. But you must have done projections, you must have done, compared to agriculture, what do we call it, draagkracht, the ability of the land to sustain an animal per unit. How does it compare?
So you're saying a conversion rate per unit of input?
Yes.
It's a good question. I think the one thing to note is that we're doing it in a more controlled environment, so things like zoonotic diseases become less of an issue. We've got really expensive feedlot systems, etc., and we've seen it in the last year or two, listeria and avian flu. That results in us not needing to use as many antibiotics and hormones. In terms of conversion of feed to protein, We're working on probably around a 1/6, which essentially is on par with chicken. If you look at it, the feed to output ratio. But these are on very early stage R&D, and like a lot of the stuff will change.
Yeah.
But that's roughly where we are on a conservative. But as we move down the line, the conversion ratio of our media development only gets better. And then the improvements, and the quality also is far more consistent.
Yeah.
But it is only on certain types of muscle and fat. So there's a lot of other things that we have to do to introduce new types of protein into the final form of a burger or soon to be a steak, for example.
It's fascinating. So what does the timeline look like on this? What do you need to achieve the objectives that you set out?
Look, I think there's several components that are sort of macro and micro factors for us. Obviously, as a startup, number one is funding. You know, like I don't have to go into too much detail about that because I'm sure you've had a few conversations today about that. But what we are doing is an expensive. It's an expensive technology for now. It's not. There's no precedent. You know, we're the first ones to do it. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to stumble on R&D to actually like perfect this whole process. What we are trying to do differently, and that's the platform model that we've adopted compared to a lot of our companies, our friends up north who are also working on this technology, is we're trying to build a platform that can be put into a value chain of an existing food, meat, or quick service restaurant chain, retail, etc. So that we can sort of work with them and on them, and they've got the manufacturing capacity and the distribution, and we can focus on the technology. So that's how we believe that the funding component, and we're in South Africa, so it's cheaper for R&D, we might be able to sort of circumnavigate that. But essentially, we're trying to raise quite a large check to prove what we've done at an R&D stage, at a pilot stage, and then move on from there. So that's just on the funding component. But let me just briefly talk about the most important, and then work backwards: the consumer. So
exactly,
we are developing a technology that South Africans love meat. I mean, we don't have to watch like
it's part of
like
the
you don't
DNA.
even. I can't even. You know, as someone who hasn't eaten conventional, I've eaten our meat. I haven't eaten conventional meat in years. I know what it's like to go to a braai. You know, and it's anyway. So that's why part of the inspiration for the company to be able to bring my own burgers. But the point is that the consumer has to be able to understand and accept and be keen to try this. And the reasons are environmental and everything, but cost. So if it doesn't cost them the right price, people aren't going to buy it. And that's a problem with plant-based foods. The people say it's too expensive, it doesn't taste as good enough. So we believe that we can bring a product to go to market with a hybrid technology, a combination of a cultivated muscle as well as plant protein, for example, is how we get to market quickly with a delicious product, which people will prefer maybe to a plant-based burger, for example. Consumer is a component, legal is massive. And when I mean legal, I mean regulations. So in the South African context, we've worked with Dallard and we've worked with the likes who you can imagine. And you know, I think there is interest from our government on this, and there's from the food security component and a technology driver. And also we're retaining talent in this country, but who would leave. So that's necessary on the regulatory environment. There are difficulties in Europe and in America where people are actually trying to ban the technology because it's potentially going to harm farmers, which I don't think is the case. And then sort of the most challenging one that my team are working on is the engineering and the scaling of something that's been developed at lab conditions and making it at massive brewing conditions. And that requires skilled people working on a very challenging place to make it as delicious and acceptable as possible. So across that, it's a very difficult line that we have to walk, but we're obviously pretty excited about taking this on.
When we speak about funding and people getting involved in partnering with you, it's always easier for investors to fund something that the payoff is actually in the foreseeable future. But with you, it's still a little bit experimental. But how do you get that vision across? How do you tell that story?
Yeah, I think the story component is massive. It's something that we've been trying to craft for years. I don't think it's an ongoing process. You know, personally, I don't want to sell something that, I want to sell something that I believe in. Yeah. So like a lot of the times, I think people want to push founders to sell this like vast dream where I think there's a big enough dream within the technology that we're doing. I think the other component is that we need the right capital. So in the beginning, we looked very much only at VC, which I think was a bit of a mistake. We have really changed our gaze and we've actually registered our company in the UK for this. To be having ourselves, to have a footprint in the UK and a footprint in South Africa, where we can actually get access to more grant funding.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, there's not enough grant funding or the speed at which grant funding is being executed in South Africa is not high. And so we need to be able to do that within the UK. So the blended approach in terms of bringing the quick VC money, quicker, should I say, VC money, and getting access to other components in terms of corporate venture, but also grant funding is the way that we're looking at it. And the timeline is longer. When we started this project 5 years ago, I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. I don't think the industry realized. The industry is only 10 years old. So now we're trying to sell an industry on 10 years old that's still probably got another 10 years to really maximize it.
An industry that's essentially still academic.
It's moving, it's taking academia and putting it into commercial too quickly, some would say. So we've been having to try and find a way of how do you extend that timeline, that commercialization timeline, so that the academics can do what they do, because they need the stuff that they need to solve, but we need to make the money. So what our approach has been to develop a B2B model where we're bringing companies in earlier to giving them access to feasibility studies, to prototypes, to pilot facility plans, etc., where they can actually become more comfortable. Revenue generation for us, it doesn't require us to sell burgers tomorrow, but it gives us a partner that can walk the line with us over a period of time and showcase that there is offtake, and then we've got a market when we eventually do sell.
I mean, it gives you that feedback already. So
I mean, the learnings that you get from a hair protein from a retailer, and trust me, I've had these conversations. These guys all they know is meat, and I'm coming in with a very interesting component. And when they eat one of our meatballs, they're quite impressed. I mean, they didn't say too much. I think they were trying to keep their cool.
Yeah.
But that learning that we've got with engaging with the retailers, with the quick service restaurant chains, the meat companies. I mean, we engage with meat companies. I mean, we're a meat company or a meat and food company, engaging with these guys, learning tons, and we've learned a hell of a lot. And now it's just how do we commercialize? What are those first steps? And for us, it's let's get them on the pipeline that says we'll give you an understanding. You'll learn, you'll be able to get the board on board or whatever it is, and then say, okay, once we've got that, buy a pilot facility from us and let's go from there.
Perfect. It's interesting that you mentioned regulations. I think a while back we attended the WIOMSA conference and someone spoke.
What conference was it?
WIOMSA, Western Indian Oceans, Marine. It's a
long one, okay, sure.
But it's a bunch of marine biologists coming together and speaking, especially to the effects of the circular economy and how they can take all of the plastic that's in the oceans and actually do something useful with it. And funnily enough, a lot of the issues standing in the way was regulations, not being able to push regulations through quickly enough. And it seems like let me ask the question, how important is it for us to get regulations to be pushed through quicker? That support from government, that support from external factors that you don't necessarily have the control over.
Yeah, so data says that consumers do listen to regulations. They're more likely to accept something new, regardless of their beliefs. That is on food. That regulations and approval does make it. I mean, it makes a big difference in the way that government talk about new novel products. At a high level, what happened about in 2020 was the first time after about 8 years, the first burger was sold in Singapore, and the Singaporean Food Association agency gave approval for cultivated meat to be sold in Singapore, and that sets a precedent. And that government, because they've also been very supportive of cultivated products, because in Singapore you don't have a lot of land, so they're trying to create a way of not being a net importer all the time. The government is also backing, so it's very important there that you had a government that was interested in supporting it, but also did the regulations. And they gave the blueprints essentially for free. We engaged with the Singaporean governments they were helping us to engage with our local government to say this is how we plan to regulate.
Open sourcing
just open source, exactly, and which is not a page turner at all. But luckily, I don't have to really do all that kind of stuff. But the point is that there are movements, but there are also pushback. So there's got to be, and the pushback is coming in where you think it would be in terms of the industrialized sort of agriculture. We're saying they're threatened by it, and I understand why they might be threatened by it, but for the most part, I think this is just going to be an extension in the beginning, and you get more protein to more people. So there's how do you get that conviction within the existing farming community and the Red Meat Association, for example, like in South Africa? That's something that we've tried to do. We're still, it's not perfect, but we really are trying to have that open dialogue. And then once you've got those conversations going, then the ones that you're speaking to government become easier. In South African space, and this is why South Africa is our R&D hub, is that the regulatory environment, there is a lower burden. And I'll give you an example. we went from a sell to a tasting in 18 months, okay? The Dutch took, I mean, I don't want to say it, but like a lot longer, years and years and years, and they still haven't done enough tastings in the Netherlands because of all the regulations in the EU around novel foods. So that does hamper innovation. Whereas in South Africa, there's capacity to grow, and I think there's an excitement amongst government to say, like, we need to do this. We need this kind of technology happening in South Africa. So that allows us also to work between the UK and South Africa. And the UK is also very much a forerunner on biotechnology. So they've actually pumped lots of money into it. They're making more sandbox types for that. So we've picked countries. I mean, South Africa's our home, but our next country, the UK, was picked based on the fact that they are pumping money into cultivated meat, biotechnology, and allowing academics and commercialization to happen without unnecessary. I think it's important, but unnecessarily regulations are very much not needed right now.
Can you speak to me about if we speak about agriculture, and I know you're referring specifically to industrialized agriculture, but we happen to have a bit of a history with agriculture and the work that we do, and we know that regenerative agriculture, precision agriculture, all of these positive concepts, looking at farming with nature is on the rise. That narrative is on the rise. Do you think that there's a connection there?
So, I mean, personally, my view is that I think we will eat meat forever. Okay, I think, you know, as long as Springboks are playing, we will be eating meats. But I don't think that meat will come from an animal that was killed in the future. That's my controversial statement. And I think that there is a significant amount of shift that's going to happen when all those things you just described.
It has
to have different aspects of innovation with agriculture, and eventually the feed will be the same, the output will be the same, but the middleman is going to change a little bit, just because you don't have the space, for example. And so the intensification of farming, I think, was a necessary evil. It gave enough protein to the world over the last 50 years to really ramp up things.
So the pendulum has swung too
exactly.
far.
And now we're saying, okay, how do we modify that? And I think a lot of people feel like the alternative proteins and maybe the vegan discussion is kind of an attack on existing farmers, whereas I think that's probably incorrect on both sides to some degree. And I think we will see a lot of innovation, and I think the market will just tend. So if people are moving towards one way, that's the way to go. And it's price, cost, taste, and convenience. And if that's what will ultimately determine what farmer X puts in the ground. I mean, they put what's in the ground depending on what comes from the consumer. And I think it's going to dictate by the consumer, by markets, and then the farmer will, we're always going to need farmers. There's no discussion without that.
A convention like the South African Innovation Summit, how important is this to have these discussions?
Look, I mean, as a startup founder of 5 years, it's a lonely journey. Seriously, it's, I mean, you know what it's about. It's like you don't know why you're doing it sometimes. It's like there's just sleepless nights. Anyway, you don't give up. But sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? So for me, these things are about community and showcasing that there's an ecosystem in South Africa. When I left South Africa in 2016, I went to Germany, and I was blown away by the ecosystem that I've plugged myself into, that eventually allowed me to bring this idea and this technology with another partner back in the day and bring it to South Africa. When I left South Africa, first I was living in Durban, so Durban's a little bit, they're working on their ecosystem, but it wasn't really there. Now it is. Now you go into a week like this, like these events all the time, and I think it creates a belief that there is a system, there's a way of connecting with people, and importantly, making conversations that shape your business and ultimately accelerate your business. And to be honest, that's all SA Innovation should be doing. Nothing else. They can probably take all these chairs out here, open up a bar, and there'll be a lot more innovation happening. But I think it's important, and I think it's a really good way to connect. And we need more spotlights, and we need to create an ecosystem that's thriving and can develop of itself. It doesn't just rely on funding from abroad or something like that. So, big
Absolutely. 100%. Thank you very much.
What a pleasure.
Yes, is that the book you're coming through?
No. I would have said it was